So this week we had 3 papers to read. First, I'm going to dive into my favorite one. I literally wrote that I love this paper on it. It was just very eye-opening in the sense that it made me realize that I may need to do a little more research about nonprofits before I am fully invest in them and back them all the way, because sometimes we can be blinded by what the society portrays. So, oh, sorry. Just diving in is that it's called the Friendship Club in the Well Springs of Civil Society. So basically, it dives in and talks about how there's certain programs that were made for social and environmental society, but the main thing is that it dives into a situation where a woman was found and she was beaten and killed, and the reporter realized that she was from the Friendship Club, and so they went into that and they found that this club, he explained it, the reporter, was an independent social club for recovering addicts, and that it was formed by these African Americans that were not welcome at other places for recovery. And so they created this to welcome anyone, allow them to be free to voice their opinions, but no drugs, alcohol, physical abuse, weapons, or gambling were allowed. So those were kind of the only restrictions in this club. And yes, at first I was like, that doesn't sound like great publicity, really focusing on how a woman was beaten and killed and then how it's for recovering addicts. But in reality, it kind of opened my eyes in a sense that just because that's what I perceive doesn't mean it's wrong. So I was pretty inspired by these 2 African American men that made the best of African Americans that made the best of their situation and created a safe haven for other recovering addicts that did not feel welcome in other places. So that was very, very eye opening. And then so this reporter had published this, and then it caught the attention of the Bradley Foundation. So they went to the club and found that there were card games, pool games going on. There was a jukebox, a bar, of course, with soda and juice boxes. They were recovering addicts, no alcohol, no drugs. So they were very interested in the sense of how did they form this. They didn't have the help of other people. They didn't have the help of the rich and the nonprofits. So that while they were there, this man gave them the History of Friendship Incorporated, which was a book that was composed for their 20th anniversary, and it basically focused on hard time, struggle, conflict, turnover, controversy, and crackdown. And as they're reading this, they're realizing that in today's society, the public attention to civil society, all of this would have been overlooked because it's focusing on like how hard it is and the struggle and the conflict and the controversy and the crackdown and everything, and how that would just be too hard, pass it along. That's not in a perfect little box, so we're not going to deal with it. So then it really is talking about how the wellspring of civil society really should look like. So how you have to break the chains of being dominated by those external forces. So for example, in the Friendship Club, they're breaking the chains of their addiction, and they have the support of the other recovering addicts there that are going through the same thing, and they're allowed to actually grow. So in certain situations, when you go to another recovery center, you may not be allowed to work behind the bar or clean or be on the executive board because you're a recovering addict. You're not in the perfect little box, so you can't be on the executive board. Well, in the Friendship Club, they're allowed, everything is self-governed. So they're doing everything within the club to keep it running. So even if they mess up, they're still allowed to come back. And so I found that very nice that they were able to break the chains and get past their addiction, that external force. And then self-governance, it basically, second, the Friendship Club is going to it tries to be a zone of freedom. So it allows them to form new attitudes, new virtues. As they're clearing their minds and everything and not clouded by those external forces, then they are able to start making new opinions, form their beliefs, say what they mean, and feel accepted. That's very hard in our society, is feeling accepted without repercussion. So I thought that was nice. It was their safe haven. And so through recovery, they're actually acquiring political habits that are used in America. They're learning how to voice their opinion, they're learning how to be self sufficient. So they're really learning some things that are taken away. It may not be the traditional way, but it is their way, and it's because they're breaking the chains of those external forces and being self sufficient and able to speak their mind and have that freedom at the Friendship Club. And then we go on talking about how that perfect little box I mentioned earlier, how that falls into the conservative beliefs that civil society should be focused on charity, volunteering, the rich giving to the poor. And so the conservatives take it in that light. And so that's why the Friendship Club wouldn't necessarily be accepted, because it doesn't fall into that little box. It's actually being ran by the people that are in it. And it's not necessarily having volunteers come in. Because if you think about it, the volunteers may not necessarily see the things that the addicts are seeing, and vice versa. So how that self-sufficiency is actually benefiting to the Friendship Club. And then they go to talk about Ronald Reagan, which I found this very intriguing because it opened my eyes into a sense that sometimes certain situations can cloud your judgment and what you've said in the past and kind of change what you have deep in your heart. So Ronald Reagan, a quote he used is to end giantism for return to human scale. Basically, we needed to end the stereotypical the rich need to give to the poor, and that's how it works, and return to that all humans should be treated like a human being, not by how much they make and things like that. We should just help one another because that's the right thing to do. And then when he was elected president, his view changed, and he was more focused on how money was being allocated and if the nonprofits were getting enough money and situations. So it really did cloud his judgment, or cloud what he had said in the past, and he didn't uphold what he was saying. So I found that interesting, that sometimes power and money can definitely change what certain people are portraying. And then lastly, how I looked at a nonprofit definitely has changed because of this paper. I thought nonprofits were always great, and then now reading this paper made me realize that it's not necessarily modeled by free voluntary labor. In reality, there's a third-party government intervention that usually is occurring where they're getting money to help aid them, and it's not necessarily free voluntary labor, so it's not necessarily in the best interest of the actual neighborhood, and that's why most of the time they're no longer building that neighborhood and but rather replacing it on what they believe is right, because they don't go and dive in and do the research and really get to know the people. They kind of go in with closed minds and want to fix the problem without seeing what the problem really is. So for example, if we were to go in and help the Friendship Club, basically those people in that society conformed because they weren't being accepted in other areas, so they conformed and they opened a space for everyone, and that's why it was striving, or it is striving. And it made me realize that civil society is not perfect. It's not going to be easy. It's tough. It's something that you're going to go through trial and turbulence and all kinds of situations, and that's what real civil society is going through those ups and downs, but breaking those chains and coming back and fighting for what you believe and being self-sufficient and making your voice be heard and really setting the standard of what you believe is right and how you can make your voice be heard and break the external forces and really break out of those chains. So you don't need money. You don't need those external forces to necessarily aid in a situation. You can be self-sufficient if you put your mind to what you believe. So it just takes one small act, create something so big for other people. Making the difference in one person's life, honestly, is all that it takes. Okay, so the next paper that we had to read was How Diverse Users and Activities Trigger Connective Action Via Social Media, Lessons from Twitter #campaign I Look Like an Engineer. This was amazing because I actually, I saw a lot of this. It's still occurring today, is #I look like a nurse, or #I look like a doctor, things like that. So women, it was basically started by a simple billboard ad where they posted a woman and she had a picture and it said #I look like an engineer. or no, she posted and was like, I'm an engineer. And that created the movement because males were saying that no, she's too pretty to be an engineer, there's no way, they're just doing this to bring in advertising because she's pretty. Well, then she came back and retaliated and said, no, like, I want to make an actual, I want to make it my voice be heard and actually create a change, not just start a movement and just spread it, but actually make a change. So that was the big thing for me, is that sometimes on social media some people just want attention, and so it's actually those people that actually want to make it a difference, that they really focus on four things, which is it's event driven, media driven, industry driven, and personality driven. So basically it's event driven. It's going to have that force, that it's not going to just be open to the one event, but it can be open to other people. Media driven, you're getting that news coverage, those things, those external things. It's not just media, it's offline media as well, so that's important. Industry driven, you're going to have those corporations, those organizations coming and backing you up because it's such a big deal and it has that momentum going for it. And then personality driven, it's able to connect to different personalities, and then in a wide spectrum, everyone's connecting and helping that statement be heard. So there was two other things, affordance, and then the connective action. But what I really liked is that I liked how they focused on that, how success is not getting past that initial spike and really focusing on that momentum and diving into those four aspects. Those things I really saw eye-opening, is that some people just, like I said, going for that attention, and if you do definitely dive into those four aspects, so you can keep that momentum going, and it's always going to have a cause. How hashtag I look like an engineer changed to actually I look like a doctor, or I look like a teacher. It could be used for males as well, in the nursing industry, hashtag I look like a nurse. So it's not just portrayed just for women either. It could be anybody, just opening that diversity. And so that's what I found intriguing about this paper. They had many points, but those were the things that really stood out to me, was event driven, media driven, industry driven, and personality driven. And in the end, rather than being strong and collective, it's the ability to connect. If you're able to connect, that's what creates that success. So instead of being, it might be sparingly, but you're able to connect to different people, or sparsely, and you're able to connect to different people, it's going to have strong success. So I found that very intriguing, in that she wanted to make an actual action, not just a presence. So she really focused on those four things and had the backing of other industries as well. So each piece of those four things come together and really make it a success. You can't just have personality, you have to have that industry, you have to have that media, which is offline as well, and that event driven. So I believe those four things really dove into that. And as someone that actually looks on social media, I'm really going to pay attention to that now and see if people are just wanting to be a presence or actually make a change. And also, it keyed in on something from another paper, Bowling Alone, and how we're not connected to one another, and that's a downfall because of our technology. And I really love this paper because it showed the strengths of our generation, that sometimes, yes, technology disconnects us, but in the same sense, it can connect us if it's used for the right outlet and it's used correctly. So I believe that this showed that our generation can make a change through our technology, and not all things technology should be frowned upon. And so I understand that, yeah, technology can disconnect us and we could be sitting right next to each other and not talk, which, yes, that has its downfalls, but in the same sense, we should be looking at some of the positives that it gives us, such as this connecting and making the ability to connect worldwide and connect to other cultures, and see that just because we're from different cultures, we still being diverse is important. And seeing that some beliefs, yes, they might have their belief and I have my belief, but at the end of the day, we come together because we are humans. So I found that, technology does have its key, and yes, our generation in previous papers was really frowned upon, and that we use technology too much and we do this too much, and we're really taking away from civic engagement. But this just goes to show that civic engagement and like having a contribution to society can vary in how it's perceived and how it's portrayed in people's eyes. And this paper was really, it allowed our generation to shine in a positive light. So I really like this paper. And then the last paper, coalitions of the willing and responsibilities to protect informal associations, enhance capacity, shared moral burdens. This paper for me left me questioning many things. I believe this paper was amazing because it is debatable and it leaves you questioning some things, and so it really gets your brain going. For me, I really want to dive into how it starts off with moral responsibility and the fact that some people's definition of moral responsibility can differ, and then the responsibility to protect, how that can differ as well. So I for me, I really enjoyed this because I always have that sense in explaining certain words is difficult, in the sense that what is good may not be good to another person. Like the word good, what I see as good may be different to another person because of their learned behaviors and their culture and their surroundings and their environment. So I found that moral responsibility, what I find to be a moral responsibility may not be a moral responsibility to someone else. So that I found that intriguing just right off the bat. Dove in, like I saw that and I'm like, okay, this is going to be an interesting paper. And basically it kind of shows that forward thinking is talking about duty and obligation, and backward thinking is talking about blame and accountability. So how in the future, like people that are thinking forward, they're thinking about, okay, it's our duty and our obligation, and people in the back are like, okay, you did this, you're to blame and you should be held accountable. So kind of going into that, it was really diving into if a coalition of the willing is a moral agent or not. And basically it keyed in on 5 points: that it has to have a corporate identity, decision making structure, being able to translate what they're saying into action, form an identity over time, and the conceptions of a self as a unit. So that was a little bit tricky for me to grasp onto. That's why I'm really wanting to dive into this in class, because I would love to get other opinions, and I think that each of them, like corporate identity, having that identity that's set, a decision-making structure, how we're going to make it as a group rather than an individual, translated to action, basically just making things happen in action, how they're forming identity over time because of these things, and lastly, seeing itself as a unit, which when it's said like that is simple and you just kind of go off the words, but there's other aspects to take into key, because like I said, everyone's going to have a different definition for what's morally responsible, and what should be classified as our responsibility to protect. So that's my thing right now, is that this paper leaves a lot of questions, because there is not necessarily one code and another code, and certain things aren't written in stone. It's kind of based off of what our opinions are, so it leaves that door open. And then what I found quite crazy is we just talked about informal government and how our informal situations and how they kind of keep our economy running. So it's not necessarily controlled by the government, but if it's not there, for example, the immigrants, how when Alabama made strict laws and they were gone, they had a labor shortage and that informal economy stopped running. So it really talks about informal thinking and other informal things that basically are part of the coalition of the willing, because without it, you don't necessarily have that aspect. You have to sometimes think beyond certain things, and it's informal. It's not formal. It's not in a pretty little box, like I said. So I was pretty intrigued by that. So I think in this paper, it's easy to say there's many things that many people can agree to disagree on. I think they keyed it up perfectly at the end when they stated that this article has aimed both to offer more demanding account of moral responsibility in relation to such entities in world politics and to set the stage for crucial further questions. I think sometimes we are so quick to just say, well, jump the gun and go do it, or do this and do that. So when we do that, it kind of goes back to that backward thinking and the blame and accountability instead of that forward thinking of it's our duty and obligation. So I think it does set the stage for crucial thinking and further questions, because for me right now I'm questioning what I find morally correct and what I find a moral responsibility, and at the same time I want to take in consideration what other people are thinking, because like I said, you need to go into something from these previous papers. You need to go into something with an open mind and an open heart and willing to hear other people. So I might have my moral beliefs, but when someone tells me their situation, it might change on different circumstances. So that's why it's so hard to define, like, if the coalition of the willing is actually a moral agent and if it should be supported and other entities. But I believe that at the end of the day, we really need to go into further thinking and not just have one technical definition, but really dive into different situations and what is in the best interest of our society as a whole. So each of these papers definitely made me question certain things. It wasn't I believe other papers were straight to the point. It was kind of easy to dive in and to make that straight judgment. But some of these papers, they leave you questioning and doing self-evaluation, which is a sign that it was a great paper. So I believe at the end of the day, I don't have all the answers to some of these papers, and that I think that's the point of these papers, is that you don't have the answers, and that's okay, because each day you need to evaluate what is going on in the situation. So realizing that I had asked, how do we help someone without offending them, because our society, it's so easy to offend one another. I believe the first paper really helped me realize that going in with an open heart and open mind and listening to what they need help on and not assuming what they need and trying to fix them, but rather just aid them and rebuild rather than try to fix them. Help them build and help them recover and break past those boundaries, make their opinions, help them see that, get them on the right path, and let them go from there. Don't fix them. Don't go in and be like, oh, you're not perfect. Here, you're fixed. So that answered one of my questions for sure. I think the second paper was intriguing because it showed that our generation does make contributions to society in a sense that other generations in the past could have never done. We're connecting on such a higher level, but there's certain things you have to be aware if they want to make an action or just be a presence and have those followers. And then lastly, this last paper is making me question and making me look at things in a different light, in the sense that not everything's cut to the point, not everything's as simple as it seems. So we need to, and for me, at the end of the day, the coalition of the willing and responsibility to protect. I think for me, it's the coalition of the willing. No, it's not defined as this in the paper, but for me, it's the coalition of the willing to listen to people, being willing to help them, or being able to see what we need to do and how to protect them. And basically, it's not necessarily said in the paper, but for me, that's how I took it after reading the first two papers and putting them into light. So I can't wait to discuss these in class, because these are some intriguing papers, and I believe that it's opened the floor to think, and it's opened the floor to discuss, and I would really like to dive deep into this paper with other people, because I do need help, and it's okay to need help, and this paper made me realize that, and it's okay to accept it and see other people's perspective, because that's how we grow as a society as a whole. So, thank you.